Hello and welcome to episode 137 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. On today's show, the Sarah Enigma will be back to wrap up her 5-episode stretch of asking questions from the point of view of somebody who hasn't visited the theme parks in years. She brought us 3 episodes on Walt Disney World, and this is her second and final episode for Universal Orlando Resort. These have been so helpful for people who don't get to go to the parks as often as I can visit them. My wife, Courtney, will also be on the podcast today to do a dining review of an Epcot restaurant. This is a very busy show, so let's welcome Sarah now. Thanks for being here.
It's always great to be here.
You have a ton of questions ready for me, and some of them are going to be informative, some of them are just fun, and let's talk a little Universal.
Great. What is your favorite lesser-known thing to do or see?
Sarah, I don't know why I'm really drawing a blank on this question. I mean, if you'd ask me about Walt Disney World, I would have 50 answers right off the top of my head. So I'm going to go with something that might be just lame and cheesy, and I don't even know why I'm bringing it up. But in the queue to the Jimmy Fallon ride, which I am not saying the Jimmy Fallon ride, please be patient. But in the queue to that ride, they have a tribute to all of the hosts of The Tonight Show. And I've always really loved the history of broadcasting. I mean, I worked in radio for so long, and specifically late night television like The Tonight Show, and then of course, later with the drama with David Letterman and Jay Leno and that whole thing. And then later the drama between Jay Leno and Conan O'Brien. And just seeing that tribute to Johnny Carson and the fact that they do mention Conan O'Brien as somebody who hosted The Tonight Show. And looking back on that old school broadcasting that I love so much, is actually a place that I'll spend a lot more time than I'm willing to admit to most people. That I will just look at some of the things that they have on the desks and really appreciate that. The ride itself is pretty lame, but the queue is fantastic.
That's great. Now, you told me something new the other day that I did not know about, so I'm hoping you could elaborate for more of the audience. What is the tribute store, and what is your favorite theme that you have seen in the tribute store?
So Universal always either has an active tribute store or they're in the process of transitioning to a new tribute store. And this will usually be during Mardi Gras. It's a Mardi Gras themed tribute store. During the holiday season, it's usually Christmas themed or winter themed at least. Then there will be one that is definitely Halloween themed because Universal really, really does Halloween. But then a lot of times during the summer, they will theme it to something special, something unique. Like this year, because of the 30th anniversary of Jurassic Park, it was a Jurassic Park tribute store. And this will always be a store. There will be a lot of merchandise for whatever they're promoting, whether it be Jurassic Park 30th anniversary, whether it be Halloween Horror Nights or Mardi Gras. But it will also be heavily themed, and there will be photo opportunities. And you saw the picture of me sitting on the toilet in the bathroom, and the dinosaur comes crashing through the wall, and you can do all kinds of things like that. And then at the end, there's also usually a sweet stand that has some desserts that are themed to whatever is happening in the tribute store. I really love the Mardi Gras tribute store every year. Universal just does Mardi Gras so well. I know they get so much credit for Halloween because people like Halloween Horror Nights, but I think they do Mardi Gras even better than they do Halloween.
That's awesome. Now, if you're thinking of taking a trip to Universal Orlando in the next couple of years, is it worth waiting for the opening of Epic Universe, even though the opening dates are not yet confirmed?
So you're technically correct that they are not saying, for example, opening Memorial Day in 2025, Universal's Epic Universe. But we do know that this is opening in 2025, and they are moving incredibly quickly to get this theme park built. So I have no reason to think that this is going to end up being a Disneytron thing where it ends up being 4 years after we thought we were going to get the thing that we finally get it. This is going to be opening for the summer of 2025, in my humble opinion. As for your question, I think it's going to depend on how much you're planning on traveling, how important a Universal Orlando Resort vacation is in the scheme of things as you look 5, 10 years out in your planning. I do think it would be beneficial to get a Universal Orlando Resort vacation out of the way before Epic Universe opens to sort of do all the things like Velocicoaster and Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure, especially if you haven't done them yet. To do those things, to see Diagon Alley, to spend the time in Hogsmeade, to ride Spider-Man as many times as you want, because I think once Epic Universe opens, I think you're going to want to spend a lot of time in that theme park. And I think people are going to be really, really focused on that park. And remember, Epic Universe is going to be a few miles away from the other parks. So this is going to be a much different situation than if you're at Universal Studios Florida and you want to just walk over to Islands of Adventure or take the Hogwarts Express over to Islands of Adventure. This is going to be probably a completely different day for you going to Epic Universe. So I think it's very possible that some people might make Epic Universe a part of their Walt Disney World vacation, where maybe they'll go for 3 or 4 days to Walt Disney World and then they'll just do that one day at Epic Universe because maybe the year before they did Islands of Adventure and Universal Studios Florida. Not to get distracted or off topic, but one of the things we've been talking about is whether Epic Universe is going to, in the short term at least, hurt the other Universal parks because it might pull people away from them. And it's not like it would be easy to go, Epic Universe is packed, let's go walk over to Universal Studios Florida, because you would have to walk across I-4. Like, you're not going to be doing that. So I think it would be worth it to do a vacation where you focus on Universal Studios Florida, Islands of Adventure, maybe do Volcano Bay, and then come back and make Epic Universe the main focus of your trip when you come back in 2025 or 2026.
That makes a lot of sense to me. So going back to the other two Universal parks, if it's raining, what do you recommend to do in each park?
Well, the Bourne Stunt Show, if you can get into a showing of the Bourne Stunt Show, a lot of times those Florida rains are fast. So you can just immediately get in line, wait for the next showing, and hopefully by the time you've gone through the queue, you've gone through the pre-show, you see the show, then you come out into a store. Once you walk around that store, it's probably going to be okay to head back out because the storm has probably ended. And if it hasn't ended, just suck it up because you're getting wet that day. So the Bourne Stunt Show is a really good one at Universal Studios Florida. Over at Islands of Adventure, I think it's a little more open than over at Universal Studios. There aren't as many things that I can think of getting out of the way. There's a really cool queue for the Kong Skull Island ride. So maybe if you just suck up a long wait, it's like all inside so you won't be getting hit by the rain. And then the majority of the ride is inside. I believe if it is raining, they can make the entire ride inside. So that might be a good option. And another option is just steering into the skid and riding the water rides at Toon Lagoon and just being like, you know what? I'm already going to get wet, so I may as well just get soaked. And that's also an option sometimes when it rains.
I'm interested to hear if your answers are the same to the next question, is what do you do if it's very hot out?
Well, definitely the Bourne Stunt Show would be my answer there. As for Islands of Adventure, I might hop into Confisco if it got too hot because, like I said, you can usually get a table pretty easily. If I hadn't already organized my day and figured out where I was going to be eating, I think I would. I'd hop into Confisco. You have to remember sometimes with sit down restaurants, I think people don't think about this, but you know me well enough to know why I do think about this. If you're at a sit down restaurant as opposed to a quick service restaurant, you're getting refillable drinks when you're talking about sodas, water, and things like that that you pay for individually at a quick service location. So I would sit down at Confisco, get a couple really big sodas, eat a hummus, and refresh myself, get myself psyched up to go back out and get into that Spider Man queue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. If you're going to the Universal Orlando only because you want to go to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, is it worth it to just go to the Wizarding World, or do you think you should also spend some extra time outside of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter?
Well, I think there are two people recording this podcast right now, and both of us would have completely different answers to it because of our personalities. And I think that's going to be my answer. Like, it depends on your personality. Would it be worth it for me? No, I never got into the Harry Potter books or movies. I have never read one of the books. I have never seen one of the movies. I will literally make Courtney pause the movie if like I'm getting ready for work and she starts watching a Harry Potter movie. I will make her pause until I leave the house. So, while I do love the Wizarding World of Harry Potter and think it is incredibly well themed and I can spend hours there, I wouldn't make it my whole vacation. But for somebody who loves Harry Potter as much as you love Harry Potter, of course you could make it your whole vacation. Like, it wouldn't even be very hard to do that. You could spend days, multiple days in those two lands and not have to do anything else. Now, I think if you do that, you're missing the Bourne Stunt Show and you're missing Spider Man and you're not enjoying Seuss Landing or any of these other things that might not even be top tier e-ticket things that everybody talks about when they talk about a Universal vacation, but are really quality and are really entertaining. But you could absolutely do it and you would absolutely have a fun time. Like, I would imagine, I don't think we've ever talked about this before, but I'm willing to bet that you have done it already.
Yes, the first time I went, I did think I spent 2.5 days, and most of it was at the Wizarding World. I think I hit a couple of the Marvel rides, and the rest of Universal. I remember riding the Hulk distinctly. But the most recent time I went was because Hagrid's Motorbike Adventure had just opened, and I knew I had to ride it. And since I'd already been to the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and I decided since I wasn't your friend yet and I didn't know how much more was in Universal, I bought a 1 day park hopping ticket and I did all of the Harry Potter stuff in 1 day. And it was a packed day, but it was thoroughly enjoyable. So I think you can do both. You can extend Harry Potter or you can just do it in 1 day. But now I would do more because I didn't know there was even a Bourne show, and that sounds very interesting.
It's very, very cool. And like, I want people to understand how much I do not care about the intellectual property that is attached to it because I think that's an important thing in showing how much this is a really, really cool thing. That the first time I saw it, I was just like, I came home and I was like, Courtney, I got to get you to see this thing. And it's a stunt show in a theme park. Like, you don't normally think, I have to show you this thing.
Another question, and because I mentioned I had been on like Spider-Man and the Hulk, is that if you are a Disney Marvel fan, do you think it is worth riding the Universal Marvel rides?
Yeah, so the Universal Marvel rides are definitely themed towards the comic books more than they are towards the movies. Well, they're not really themed towards the movies, and a lot of this is going to get into the legalese as to why Universal is still allowed to use these characters and which characters Disney's allowed to use, which ones they're not allowed to use. But I would say that the Spider-Man attraction, I don't care, like Bourne, I don't care if you've ever seen a Spider-Man movie. I don't care if you've read a comic book. If you just have a general knowledge of Spider-Man the character, you're going to love this ride. It's an amazing ride. And when it comes to Hulk, I mean, that's just a roller coaster. So it doesn't matter if you've seen a movie or anything. Much like Velocicoaster. Yes, Velocicoaster is themed towards Jurassic Park, but, dinosaurs, whatever. Like, if you just like dinosaurs, you will get the theming even if you've never seen a Jurassic Park movie. So I don't think somebody who has become a Marvel fan because of Disney Marvel is going to be really attracted to Superhero Island at Islands of Adventure. But I think somebody like me who knows of Marvel because of what's in the zeitgeist and what everybody knows about Marvel, like the things that seep into the collective consciousness, these are iconic enough characters that people know the basics. And I think everybody can enjoy this land.
That makes sense. Which Universal resort would you recommend staying in?
Oh, that is a good one, Sarah, because there are a lot of different thoughts on that. Initially, if you're on a budget, but you still want to stay on property, I would say both of the Endless Summer resorts are very, very good. I've stayed at both of them and I really had a great time. I have even suggested to people going to Walt Disney World to stay at Endless Summer because they're not right in the Universal cluster, so it is still an easy shot to take an Uber over to Walt Disney World. But I think I'm going to say when it comes to the more affordable resorts, I'm going to say Cabana Bay is going to be my option. Cabana Bay is wonderful. The rooms are really cool and kitschy and themed towards like the 50s or 60s. The whole resort has just this really cool vibe. It is very close to the theme parks. You still get your benefits with Endless Summer and with Cabana Bay, where you get early park entry depending on which park is having it that day. But the deluxe resorts at Universal Orlando Resort come with Express Pass. So while you are paying a premium for those resorts, you are also getting a premium perk back in return. So I might consider staying somewhere like the Hard Rock Hotel or Portofino or Sapphire Falls or one of those resorts that is on that more deluxe trajectory because nobody wants to wait in line. So if you're going to pamper me with shorter lines. That's definitely a good benefit.
So you kind of answered this already, but would you rather stay on a Disney property or a Universal property hotel if you're spending days in both theme parks?
5 years ago, if you would have told me I was going to say this, I would have thought you were crazy. And while I do kind of think Sarah's a little crazy, it has nothing to do with this question. But I am going to say Universal Orlando Resort. I would probably stay at Cabana Bay if I was doing a split stay because Disney does not offer as many benefits as Disney used to offer to people staying on property. There are still some, and it is still valid to stay on property at Walt Disney World. And if we're talking about something like Wilderness Lodge and I have that money sitting around, I'm going to do it. But if I'm on somewhat of a budget and I want to get something like Cabana Bay and get the perks for Universal, but also have fairly easy access to Walt Disney World, I have to say it's something I would consider because I've done it before. So I have stayed at Cabana Bay for split trips. And yeah, I'd kind of have to say Universal. I'm surprised though. I learned something about myself from the questions that you are asking. So that's interesting.
I'm a little bit shocked actually. Sometimes I know how you're going to answer these questions, but that was a total surprise. um,
I love the Walt Disney World resorts, and there are some that I think have a lot of benefit. But if you're talking about a split stay, I think the Universal resorts do give you enough benefit on a Universal vacation that it makes more sense to stay there.
that does make sense. Talking about split vacations, if you're planning a vacation that you're doing both Walt Disney World and Universal, are they worth doing in the same trip or are they better doing on separate trips?
It all depends on how much you have to get done at Universal, in my opinion. I could definitely see doing a 4 days at Walt Disney World and 1 day at Universal. Once you start getting into 3 days and 2 days, that's where you get to staying at Universal, like we talked about in your last question. Everybody's so different in this one, though, that it's kind of hard to answer. I am always going to gravitate towards more time at Walt Disney World, but that's just because that's my nostalgia. Those are the intellectual properties that connect with me more. But I do love Universal, so I wouldn't mind having a vacation that was 3 days and 3 days.
So, my last couple questions are kind of random, so bear with me. On non park days on your vacation, what would you do?
At Universal Orlando Resort, if I'm staying kind of on property, like I want to be in the Universal bubble, which isn't quite as all encompassing as the Disney bubble, but there is City Walk, which has a lot of great restaurants. It has a lot of shops. It has Voodoo Donuts. This is sort of the Universal version of Disney Springs. There's a nightclub there. There's a lot that you can do at Universal Orlando Resort just by spending time at City Walk and not going into a theme park. Now, I don't think Universal has quite as much to do if you're not entering a theme park as Walt Disney World. There are fewer resorts. City Walk is not nearly as big as Disney Springs, but these are definitely things to consider and things that you could do on an off day. And then if you're willing to leave property, maybe if you have a rental car, and then we can start talking about going to Disney Springs or going to the Gideons, not at Disney Springs, but in Orlando, where you don't have to wait for 2 hours to get a cookie. Or maybe leaving for an hour and going to Cocoa Beach, or leaving for an hour and going to Kennedy Space Center. There's a whole lot to do in the area that isn't just theme parks, even though we're very, very focused on the theme parks.
It's amazing how many times I ask a question and then the next question we've already kind of answered. My next question is what else in the Orlando area is worth experiencing?
I know a lot of people love SeaWorld. A lot of people do also like these kitschy vacation area things like Madame Tussauds Wax Museum and the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. That's not necessarily my vibe. I talked about Kennedy Space Center, Cocoa Beach. You could head down I-4 anywhere from 90 minutes to 4 hours and get to Busch Gardens, Tampa. That is definitely an option for roller coaster enthusiasts, would be to do a day at Busch Gardens. They also have animals, so it has that somewhat zoo vibe. And then in the Tampa Bay area, there's some very nice beaches. I believe 1 or 2 years Clearwater Beach was named like the best beach in the United States, and the water's a little calmer on the Gulf side than it is on the Atlantic Ocean side of Florida. So, depending on what you're looking at there, you might enjoy that. I'm a big baseball fan. There is minor league baseball all over the state of Florida. So, if you're there in the summer and you're looking for affordable entertainment for the family where you can take the kids and just get outside a little bit, the Lakeland Flying Tigers are in Lakeland, which is probably about an hour from Universal Orlando Resort, depending on the Champions Gate exit of I-4 once again. There is a lot to do in Florida. Once Disney went down there and then Universal opened up down there, and then a lot of things are going to sprout up to try to get your money on those days that you have an off day in between the two.
Thank you. That was a lot of great information. And now, finally, for my last question, I have a fun question. If you could create or revamp a ride in either Walt Disney World or Universal Orlando, what would you like to see added or changed?
I don't know if this is going to be a cop-out answer because I'm not going to give you something very detailed, but I wish that Universal Orlando Resort finally took advantage of the Back to the Future and Ghostbusters IPs like they did in the past, or maybe even more than they did in the past. I understand the Simpsons ride. I get that they got the rights to the Simpsons and they wanted to do some really cool stuff with it. But Back to the Future and Ghostbusters are so iconic. Along with E.T., it feels like those are three Universal IPs that can match with the iconic status of things like Star Wars and the Disney princesses. And I feel like they're just wasting it. Why we have a Jimmy Fallon ride, but we don't have a Ghostbusters ride, that's a little sketchy.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Back to the Future and Ghostbusters would be epic. Well, thank you, Rick, for answering all my questions. I think we had some great conversations today.
Thank you so much for being back on the show, Sarah.
Thanks.
In addition to her work here on the podcast, the Sarah Enigma is very active in advocating for people with chronic illness. To follow along with her Disney content, check her out on Instagram at the Sarah Enigma. And for chronic illness content, visit her other Instagram account at sava.wellness. I think her work is very important. We have always wanted to build a community around this show that raises awareness and creates inclusion. Now, to wrap up the show, here's my wife, Courtney. Thanks for being here, Court.
Absolutely. I always love talking some food.
Because we've been doing more videos from the parks, it's been a while since Courtney and I have done a dining review for the podcast. But fairly recently, we went to Chefs de France in the France Pavilion in Epcot's World Showcase. And this was just such an incredible meal, such an incredible experience that I thought we should talk about it in one of the podcasts because everything was really on point, from the service to the food and the atmosphere, because we're going to talk about something that actually happened while we were eating and we weren't even really prepared for it. But we'd always wanted to go to Chefs de France, and every time we had a reservation, either something came up and we had to cancel our park day, or we thought, well, let's just enjoy festival food. Sometimes it's hard to keep a reservation in Epcot, but this time we kept it at Chefs de France, and I got 2 entrees. Courtney was a little less self-indulgent and only got 1. So why don't you talk about the food that you got at Chef's?
Since I like seafood and I really wanted to try some of their seafood as something of a different protein that I don't always get to have, I had the salmon dish. This came with some peas and carrots and a kind of buttery, lightly herbed rice. Overall, I absolutely loved the dish. Everything was cooked perfectly and was seasoned very well, so I just thoroughly enjoyed it. Kind of simple, nothing very, very fancy, but just made very, very well.
I'm not even going to give you the French pronunciation, but Courtney got the seared salmon, rice pilaf, sweet peas and carrots, and beurre blanc sauce. This is $34.95. Chef's is not a cheap place to eat dinner. Now, I was originally going to get an entree and an appetizer. But then when I was looking at the prices, I thought, well, what's $5-10 extra dollars when you're already spending this much? So I got 2 entrees. I got the gratin de macaroni, which is macaroni baked with cream and Gruyere cheese. Gruyere cheese. I'll go with that second pronunciation there. This was basically just a fancy macaroni and cheese. It was $25.95, and this was phenomenal. This was so good. The cheese was rich and cooked under the macaroni a little bit so that it wasn't all burnt on the top and nothing on the inside. I know Courtney sometimes says things are balanced, and I think that's like the perfect descriptor for this macaroni and cheese. Like, they balance the cheese and macaroni very well for something that is $26 for a dish that you don't want to pay $26 for mac and cheese. So they had to really deliver to make me like that. And I got, it is, when in Rome, when in France, you have to get the ratatouille served on quinoa with kale. This is the plant-based option. It is $26.95. The way they made this taste hearty and taste really, really substantial when it's all vegetables and tomatoes, like, it's nothing fancy, but they make it taste fancy. And I guess that's sort of the point of the movie, Ratatouille. But the fact that they took this comfort dish and made it something that felt like you should be paying $27 for it, that was pretty impressive. Now, the most impressive thing that we got had to be the creme brulee dessert. A lot of the festivals, you can go to the France booth and get some sort of creme brulee. Sometimes they even have it at other booths. You can also get it in the bakery in the France pavilion at the back there, the patisserie or whatever. None of those creme brulees hold a candle to this version that you get at Chefs de France. It's absolutely perfect, just creamy, that outer shell burnt just right, so it's not overburnt, but it gets that caramelized sugar. This was amazing. And then, right as we were into dessert, and we're sitting at our table looking out at World Showcase Lagoon, what happens, Courtney?
The time crept up on us, and it was time for fireworks. So we were able to just be right at our table looking out the window and watching fireworks, which was pretty cool. Very cool.
So, Courtney, Chefs de France is running into two potential problems when it comes to how we're going to rate this restaurant. One, it was quite expensive. Two, we had been looking forward to it for a long time. So I want to know, do you think this lived up to the expectations and lived up to the price tag, considering it is a Disney restaurant?
I think so. I mean, the price tag, does it hurt a little bit? Yes, but I think it lives up. It lives up to the food quality. It lives up to being that it is worth the price. The overall experience was good. The service was good. Atmosphere is great. They really made you feel as if you were in a French restaurant authentically. We didn't really get to mention, but just to throw it in there, the bread service being a baguette, which was, again, just the perfect consistency. And, definitely everything felt quality.
I felt it lived up to the hype as well. I was really, really looking forward to it. And I was surprised when I left and said, yeah, that was actually worth it. Now, I got more experimental dishes, I think, than Courtney. I think Courtney was just looking for a really good quality meal. And I was like, okay, what are you doing that's a little different and unique? And sometimes that can go either ends of the spectrum. Either it can just crash and burn, or it can impress you that they made me, somebody who's pretty cheap, be okay with spending $26 on mac and cheese. So that's pretty high praise, I would say, if I'm okay that I spent $250 on mac and cheese. Courtney, thank you so much for, first of all, going to Chefs de France with me, and second of all, for being here for another dining review.
Thank you so much, as always.
This has been episode 137 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. If you're catching us on YouTube, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Next Thursday, my good friend Marissa from Chicago will be back to talk about 6 more things that need changing in Walt Disney World. We had a lot of fun with the first part of this conversation last month. Until then, have a great week.